Good morning. So welcome to XpoNorth's Q&A session this morning. The topic is HR in 2022 and looking after your biggest assets. I'm Nathalie Agnew. I'm the founder and managing director of Muckle Media, which is a PR and communications agency with offices in Inverness, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Lisa Thomson, who is the CEO of Purpose HR. Lisa founded the business 8 years ago and scaled the business up and then was acquired last year. So Purpose HR is now an AAB company. And how this session is going to work today is we're going to run a Q&A with Lisa, and we've got some kind of starting points that we'll be going through. And we do have the chat box, so if you've got any technical problems or if you've got any kind of anything you want to add to the discussion, for example, please do pop that into the chat. And then quite specifically, if you want to ask a question of Lisa, if you can put that into the Q&A, and what we'll do is we'll curate those Q&As throughout the session and get to those a little bit later on. The topic is all about HR and really looking after your people. So Lisa, first of all, it would be great to just have a brief overview of Purpose HR and also your own personal story around how you came to set this business up.
Brilliant, thanks Nathalie. Morning everyone, great to be here. So yeah, very briefly, I founded Purpose HR 8 years ago. I had a background previously in running, setting up actually and running HR and people functions in quite a number of fast-growing tech businesses actually. And so I'd done a lot of work around what are the basic frameworks that need to be in place, what support do managers need to manage teams effectively, and particularly what are the key things that organisations need to look at as they grow and as they scale as well. Certainly it was a market opportunity. There was definitely a need, and what we really did in the early days with Purpose HR was look at companies that were either startups, small SME businesses that didn't necessarily have or need the budget to put in place a HR department per se. They just needed access to flexible support. So that was really the background, and our service basically covers the full generalist functions of an HR and people team. So that's everything from what I call the employee life cycle. So everything from when you need to recruit, attract and retain people to join your business, all of the compliance aspects of employing people legally, protecting their employment rights, understanding their benefits, obligations and protections in all of those areas, keeping yourself right and out of court, but also on a wider sort of more holistic basis, creating an environment where people can do their best work, where they're empowered and enabled to really contribute to the future of your organisation and the goals of your business, and where they can also progress their own careers effectively as well. So we cover everything right through to performance management, career progressions, career ladders and structures, and training and development. So yeah, it keeps us busy. And the organisation itself, in Purpose, we've got a team of our own now of 20. So I've had a fair bit of learning, not just of coaching others what to do, but putting some of that into practice myself as well. So I'm more than happy to speak about any of that today.
Yeah, I bet. Really interesting. So you're seeing both sides of this, both growing your own business and also advising other scaling businesses on how to harness the power of HR. Great. So Lisa, who are your key customers and what problems do you solve for them?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to walk that and take it into a couple of sectors, because there's different stages, as people know, in terms of building a team, and you've been through this yourself, Nathalie, as well, so you'll know. We kind of fall into two camps. We work often with startups, and sometimes it's founders who are actually employing their very first few team members, and maybe understanding their initial obligations as an employer, taking on their first employees. And then later we tend to work with organisations that are growing and scaling, and that's around more putting in place effective frameworks, things like policies and handbooks, but also the practice around that. So looking at areas like culture, values, how they maybe want to empower people to progress and develop their own careers as well within the organisations. So we mainly, when I started the company, and it was just based on my own background and network, we mainly worked with early stage technology and life sciences businesses. And I actually had quite a strong network in terms of investors. So we did quite a lot of work initially with small companies that maybe got their first seed or sort of Series 1 angel and private equity investments. And given the nature of those businesses, a lot of the time that funding was required to fund people and headcount growth, because often your payroll, as you know, tends to be one of your biggest outgoings and costs as a business. So it's really important that you're, like anything in your business, that you're managing that well, and that you're making sure that the return on your investment is managed and that you're putting the right support in place. As per the title of this talk, people are the biggest asset to a business. So, putting the right HR in place has been a key part of that for our customers as we've grown.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking about when a business starts maybe to take on their first employees, what considerations do they need to take, and what advice would you give to anybody taking those first steps into becoming an employer?
Yeah, it's quite a big step actually, taking on your first employee. We tend to work often with small businesses and startups where in the very early stages it's been informal arrangements that they've had. Maybe they've tapped into advisory networks, people that they know, or potentially friends, for advice and guidance. But what we find is a really key point where we need to make a distinction is the point that you actually employ someone, take them onto your payroll, and pay them. So, it's really important to be clear what the basis of that arrangement is, and whether is it, a freelance type arrangement where somebody is invoicing you and they're self-employed and invoicing for services, or is it that you are actually their employer, in which case there are a lot of core obligations that people need to be mindful of and need to agree, and we would say document up front as well. So, it is really important to have a basic contract in place that sets out terms and conditions of employment. And indeed, that's actually now a requirement legally from day one, that terms of conditions are documented. That's for the protection, not just of the employer, but also of the employee as well, so that the arrangement is clear. And sometimes what people don't always realise, unless they've had support or guidance, is that regardless of the size of the employer, whether you have one or whether you have 10, 20 employees, many of the requirements are the same from day one of first employee. So things like accrual of holidays, entitlements, you need to understand that. You need to accrue and account for that with costs, even if it's a short-term internship or a fixed-term contract that you have, you do need to factor that in. There are also things like the pension, auto-enrollment compliance obligations. Doesn't matter whether you're a small employer or a large employer, those now apply. And then, things like data protection, GDPR, how you manage employees' records and personal information, all that falls under those areas of legislation. So it is important that employers understand that and get the right advice, so that they can manage that correctly. What we tend to find is when a relationship's going well and everything's good and people are happy, these things don't come up. But like anything contractual, whether it's commercial contracts or with clients, suppliers, customers, anything else, when things are going well, the contract's just there in a drawer and probably nobody looks at it, but you've got that peace of mind that it's there. But if ever there is a problem or a dispute, that's when it's important that people are clear, and that we can check that and that you have the information to hand to protect, as I say, both the employer and the employee as well.
Yeah, great. So that's great advice for those first few steps. So once a business starts to scale up a bit and grow, and let's say they've got their first 10 employees and things are starting to get a bit messy, what should they now be thinking about? What's the kind of next level up really for sort of growing businesses?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects. These compliance aspects and the documents, and having all your house in order in terms of your paperwork and things, that certainly doesn't go away. It remains just as important. In particular, if a business then is perhaps thinking about going for investment, or that could be looking for funding from, external bodies, if it's charities going for contracts or anything like that, being able to evidence or you have that diligence in place that everything is in order and above board, that remains just as important as you grow. It is also important to revisit that regularly as well, make sure it's up to date and continues to be compliant. On a wider basis, and some of the more what I would call strategic areas that we tend to work with on clients, is things like thinking about how your organisation structure will scale and evolve as your business grows. I do quite a lot of work myself with founders, and as I say, having gone through that journey myself too, it's really interesting thinking about how things work when you have a fairly flat structure with maybe, an owner or a founder and maybe one or two employees, versus when you get to around sort of 10, 15 people plus, there are various inflection points of growth where it becomes really important to look at things like reporting lines, roles and responsibilities, what I call span of control. Because as a manager, one of the important things with your people is to dedicate enough time to them, to be available, to have the right support structures in place. And what's manageable when you have 2 or 3 reports changes quite rapidly when your team scales. So even things that we talk about with our clients is often succession planning, to say, have you thought about who could potentially take on maybe more of a supervisor or a team lead or a managerial role as the team scales. And often in a small business, tends to be the case that you'll have lots of people rolling their sleeves up, wearing multiple hats and carrying out various different areas of responsibility, essentially being really flexible. That's very common in a startup or small business environment. But as businesses grow, it's important to start thinking more strategically about the organisation structure, roles and responsibilities, and maybe putting more definition around that. And those are often times, so we call this organisation design, but those are the stages where clients often need to think about potentially bringing in specialists to head different functions. It doesn't need to mean becoming overly bureaucratic or putting silos in place, but it does mean that as certain areas become more important at the business scales, take finance as an example, you potentially need to have somebody with that internal responsibility and skill set that wasn't necessary at a smaller stage of growth. So that's a big piece that we work with. Other areas are things like culture. And I always say to clients, whether or not you actually sit down and document and define your culture or your values or anything like that, they will exist. But a lot of forward-thinking organisations, they do take the time proactively to actually invest in that and thinking about, well, what kind of working environment do we want to have? What kind of culture do we aspire to as an organisation? And actually, what are our values, and are we living and breathing that as a team every day? And actually, as the team grows, how might that change in the future? And then those are areas that actually, evolve and become part of all of your HR practices. So how you recruit people, how you assess people's performance, how you maybe progress them in your organisation or manage them. Often, if you have a clear values framework in your business, it's really important to be able to link that in, so it becomes part of the common language of how you operate and do business day to day.
Yeah, great. So thinking about employer brand then, can you tell us a bit more about how you help employers to build their brand, and also how much of the employer brand sits in sort of HR, and how much would you all see sitting in marketing, and do those two things cross over?
You know, that's a great question, and I think it's a particularly topical question at the moment, given, as many people here will know, how competitive it is to recruit for many organisations. I think it does come back to what stage you're at as a business, defining your employer brand at a very early stage when you're even actually just hiring your first employee. Sometimes that's less relevant. You do find that people hiring their first 1-2 employees will go to their own network or trusted referrals, people that they know. So typically the brand is you as the business owner and the founder in it. So do people get behind you, your business idea, what you want to do, and would they want to work with you? That's the key thing. And actually, are you able to articulate what your vision is? What's your purpose as a business? Is it something that people actually think, I want to do that, I want to be part of that? That's a really exciting mission as an organisation. Probably easier to do if you're maybe somewhat what I call purpose driven, but focused on impact, or looking to make a difference. Maybe harder to do when you're in different sectors, shall we say. But we do find that. So small businesses, if you think that all people are concerned with is remuneration, well, that's one part. It's a really, really key part. But actually, increasingly, research shows people are, we spend most of our time at work. A lot of us do. It's a huge part of our life and our where we spend our time and our energy. So people want to work for an organisation where they feel that they make a difference and a contribution. So if you can articulate that, that's a really core part of your employer brand. You asked, how does that align with marketing? I guess it depends whether organisations at a stage to have a marketing function. If they do, HR and marketing should be working very, very closely together on those aspects. Absolutely. And then I think, an employer brand, always remember the biggest ambassadors for your organisation are your current employees, but also your ex-employees. So never forget that, in terms of respect, how you treat people, both when they're coming in the door, both at each stage. So when they're coming in the door, while they're with your organisation, but as importantly, when they leave and move on. Oftentimes people do move on. Nobody tends to have a fixed job for life, the way that maybe they did 30, 40 years ago. The market has changed, but equally for a lot of businesses, their alumni and ex-employees can be a really good source of referrals in the market as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's answered your question. Probably went into a few.
No, it has. Thank you. So how's the market and the need for HR and people's strategies changed in the recent years?
Yeah, I've seen it grow very much. I mean, I think, with any business, timing and the environment is always a huge factor in terms of your success. I would say, I founded Purpose HR at a time when I could see the market in terms of startups, particularly in the sectors that I was focused on, which was tech and digital sectors and things. There was an exploding number of new small businesses starting up and opening and growing. So that's one factor. And I think organisations now, they do think a lot more creatively about how to resource teams. So it's not always about, I need to hire an HR manager, I need to hire a marketing person, I need to hire a finance person. There's been a bit of a shift, I would say, to people working on, with more outsourcing or with more contractors or flexible arrangements and support. So that's been one shift. What I would say is probably a bigger shift is that organisations are thinking much more strategically about people in terms of that being a core function and about the importance. So again, back to the subject of this talk today. When I very first started Purpose HR, oftentimes you would be maybe introduced to an employer that's had a dispute. They've maybe gone through a tribunal or had a challenging exit issue with an employee, and then thought, I need to get my house in order here. I need to have better contracts for next time. I need to put processes in so I can avoid this for the future. And that's right to do. And it's still the case for some businesses. But as the market's grown, I've personally seen a lot more organisations that actually think, as a founder, very proactively and intentionally, what type of culture and environment do I want to create for staff, and that actually being one of the key things that they look at very early in the organisation's growth and development. So I think the whole topic of HR and people has grown. This isn't a talk about employment law today, and if it was, I wouldn't be the best person to give it. But that is one aspect in that compliance piece, and it's key. But equally, it sits around that much wider picture of the employee experience, the culture of the business. Some of the things, and COVID's had an impact on this, changes in terms of people's location for working. So areas like flexible working, hybrid working, remote working, these weren't necessarily things that organisations were as proactive in talking about in the time that I set up the business. Another huge shift we've seen is around wellbeing agendas. I think employers are much more open, employees and employers are actually much more open now in our experience about topics like mental health and well-being. And actually the fact that your work life and your home life and all of that is so intertwined. None of us are robots that come to work, shut down the home life, work from 9 to 5 and then go away again. So all of these topics and conversations, employees are much more forward, I think, in raising challenges and issues and being upfront, if they need support. Equally, and what is great is we are seeing so many more employers who want to have proactive strategies in place to support employees, to retain employees where there's problems, and to really create environments to help them thrive. All of that's really positive, and it's been great to work with clients on these important areas.
Yeah. How can you think of different ways that employers can sort of measure well-being and mental health and have a kind of track on things, particularly maybe in a distributed hybrid environment where you've got lots of people in different places? Sometimes you can worry about those that maybe you see a bit less of, but how do you keep in touch, and where is the line between what's appropriate for the employer to engage on and what's just maybe seen as a bit more personal? Be interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it goes back to quite simple basics in terms of the role of managers. And being there as that, particularly in remote or hybrid environments where everyone's not day-to-day in the office all the time, being there as that interface between the organisation and the employees. And, basic things like making sure, do you have regular one-to-ones with your team members? It doesn't need to be some huge fancy complex strategy. It's actually just an important check-in point. Do you catch up? And it could be like this, one-to-one, a virtual coffee, depending where people are based. Or if people do have hybrid or office environment, do we have protected time regularly, whether it's once a month, every couple of weeks, protected time that we sit down one-to-one together, and I ask my direct reports, not about have you done this document yet or how's this task going, but actually how are you? How's your experience going with working with Purpose HR? I'll talk about my team, for example, it's probably easiest, but that sort of bigger picture discussion. And we really work hard with the clients we work with and the managers just to make sure that they are focusing on that, because actually once you take on management responsibility, that's a really key part of your job. You're accountable and you're responsible for the people that report to you. So, it is important that that safe space is protected. And that tends to be the time that if somebody is having a challenge that's not brought up already, hopefully they'll feel safe and comfortable to raise it there. Equally, people do have a right, and you touched on in your question, people have a right to privacy as well. So I'm not going to sit down and, interrogate anyone that, they need to share things that actually would be more comfortable to keep private. But equally, that is a chance for a manager to be, if there is a concern about someone's attendance, someone's productivity or anything like that, just that discussion sometimes surface those things. So those basic one-to-ones and catch-ups are really, really key. And often when people are quite busy, that's the kind of thing that gets put to the side. It's actually really important. There are various tools and things in the market that businesses can use as well, to to survey people anonymously if they want to, or, you know, find ways for people to raise or, you know, surface issues. I think these are valuable. You can't really replace that importance of just, you know, regular check-ins and one-to-ones.
We use a platform called Officevibe.
Oh,
so
yes.
It's really interesting. It pushes out a survey to everyone in the team every Thursday. It's got about 6 questions in it. It's super quick and easy and simple, and it's just got a sliding scale. So people can feedback on different things, from, does my manager understand me and respect me? Am I playing a role in the future of my organisation? Am I paid fairly? Do I have, you know, the right environment to work in? All of those things. And then we can also get anonymous feedback from the team that comes through, and we respond to every piece of feedback and sort of take it forwards and review it. And we've actually found that a really interesting process to go through. And particularly, we've got this big dashboard that's presented to us each week, showing us any scores that have dropped or increased, or, you know, so for example, at one point, feedback went down. So we had a team meeting and talked about feedback and thought, how can we feedback better within the team so that we can increase that score? Completely agree. That's one part of your strategy, and that you still need that human to human thing, that, you know, different people interact and in different ways. But yeah, we've found Officevibe really useful. And we also have a employer net promoter score available through Officevibe, which if people aren't familiar with the idea of net promoter score, it's about whether people would recommend you and whether people are detractors or promoters for your brand. But Officevibe does a really nice job of turning that into an employer net promoter score. But it'd be great to hear your experiences with some of those tools, Lisa, and any you recommend as well.
100%. I mean, we actually partner with a tool. It's called Trickle, which is an employee engagement platform, and that has probably similar functionalities in a few ways. They actually came out of the CivTech Accelerator programme here in Scotland.
Okay.
They've had quite a lot of success launching that into other organisations, I think, including some of the public sector, the NHS and things like that. But it's a really nice tool where you can identify trends or areas of feedback. But you can also, there's what's called a flare system. So if someone has a concern, you can you know, put anonymously, either anonymously or named, you put your hand up, and then someone dedicated can be assigned to, you know, enter into one-to-one chat and engage with the person. And sometimes that is better to be able to do anonymously initially and build trust, and then identify if it's something that actually further support is required with. And that kind of takes me on to another initiative that I think we're seeing more and more with our clients, is that a number of our team now have trained as what's called mental health first aiders. So we can offer that now in terms of support to our clients and to managers, but equally a lot of organisations, as they grow, are choosing to train members of their own team with that area of responsibility as well. And it's definitely something that, you know, you've got to be mindful that for people it's another area of responsibility to take on. And it's something that, you know, nobody's going to become overnight a counsellor, but it's often about maybe signposting where people can access additional support and being available to support them to do that as well. So we've found a lot of value in those kind of resources. But the key thing is also in your business then making sure you signpost those and you make sure people are actually aware of it. But I still take it back, as you said, Nathalie, to that human to human piece as well, because it's really important that it's not just about, you know, having initiatives or pointing people to use this tool, but actually making sure that people know that we want to talk to them and we will engage with them, but also that we will act on the feedback. Because if you solicit feedback from people and then you don't listen and you don't act, sometimes that's more damaging than not asking the question.
Yeah, it makes me think of the kind of community boards you get in Tesco's or whatever, and it says, you know, you said that the trolleys were wobbly and we fixed the wheels, isn't it? It's that kind of situation, but within your workforce. Yeah, to close the loop. Definitely. So I guess
on that, sometimes just on that, sometimes there's niggles that come up that actually we can't fix everything and we can't do it. But see, for the importance of people having that explained to them and still feeling heard, that's as important sometimes as actually fixing the issue. So, better to listen than put your hands over your ears, I always say.
Yeah, definitely. So it's something that's really come through in everything you've said so far is the huge responsibility that's there for, employers, particularly taking on their first few staff. But I think the other thing that's really coming through is the responsibility of being a manager. And so many organisations, certainly ones I've worked in myself as well, people get promoted because they're good at doing their job, but not because they're necessarily a good people manager.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested in how we could build capacity in our managers in Scotland and in our businesses, and improve people's capacity to manage others. And also interested in any trends you're seeing around, people having different options within their career path. Because if not everybody is a great manager, maybe it's better to be able to go and, be a specialist in something and be really good at that thing. But actually, if you don't like people, don't manage people. Go and be really good at what you do. And so yeah, I guess quite a broad question there.
No, I mean there's two really interesting questions I think that come out of that. I'm actually going to start with your second point, because I think it's the point about career paths, and we see it so often, particularly in startups, where, as you say, somebody's shown a lot of potential. They've been happy to take on extra responsibility. They're probably a future talent in the organisation. And as the team scales up, a key area that comes in is, as I touched on earlier, how we structure ourselves, and that we need to bring people on to take more line management responsibility, for example. Where organisations are not intentional about their organisation design and they don't really think about these things earlier, then what often can happen is that person that's really good at dealing with the clients, or that person that's brought in loads of sales, or that person that's developed really, really strong code, well, that's our best coder. When we bring in the new person, they'll report to that man or lady because they'll learn from them, and that's the best route. I really challenge our clients to break it down to think about, actually, do they need to learn from that person and be mentored by that person, or do they need to be managed by that person? And actually that's not necessarily the same at all. And so I've done a lot of work, particularly in technical organisations and engineering functions, but it can be applicable to all different sectors, around looking at different types of what we call Y-shaped career paths. So where we maybe start to look at, do people want to be what I could call an individual contributor, where they maybe progress more technically in their specialism or their function, or do they want to take on people responsibilities as part of that and become, we could call it an engineering manager or team leader or something like that, where they take on management responsibility for individuals. And if you can think about your future design, your organisation design and team structure early, you can actually start to look at that. The key thing is even just talking to people and understanding what their interests are and goals. Do that first. You can have a real risk of people being promoted into a role that they never actually missed. They might like the recognition, they might like the progression financially, but actually if they spend most of their time sitting in one-to-ones with people and not getting to do the technical tasks that they've trained in, that they loved, they can quite quickly switch off from that and look to leave. And equally, you have to think of the experience of the people that are reporting into them as well, and whether they're going to get the best support and guidance. And then that would maybe take me on to your other question about, how can we develop and train managers? So quite a key talking point of mine, if I'm honest. It's something that I don't think organisations invest in enough, particularly smaller organisations. And sometimes I think part of that is the challenge of what's available in the market in terms of support, and equally time challenges and pressures. With our service, what we do when we work with clients, as well as designing their HR tools and their processes, we provide bespoke manager trainings in each of those. And that's one option. There are also, many sort of general manager training tools or leadership training and different types of training, external support that companies can enroll team members onto. That will tend to often be kind of theory based, and around the theory of management, how to have conversations, a lot of the kind of softer skills areas. what we tend to do with our clients, and just we found it works well, is to design processes and then have practical training that covers soft skills areas, but also covers actually how do we apply it in this organisation, how does it work, and what tools do we have here in our business to enable that. So going back to things like the one-to-ones, how do you do reviews, how do you have PDP, what I call PDPs is training and development plan discussions with your team members, how do we discuss progression in this organisation. So balancing the soft skills and the guidance and the support around conversations, it often comes down to conversations, balancing that with actual tools that managers can use as well in that environment, and communicating those, because as teams grow, that consistency piece is really, really important as well.
And I love the phrase you've used of intentional organisational design. I think that's a really interesting topic in itself, isn't it? I'm sure you could do webinars after webinars just on that one thing. But could you touch on some of the key questions that employers would need to think about, or founders, or business people running businesses? What are the considerations they need to put into this, and what are the different routes they might end up going down? What would be some examples of different approaches to the design of an organisation?
I mean, we tend to work with our clients and pay it back. So, there's sometimes this sort of concept that as my organisation grows, I need to structure myself the same as other organisations that I've seen. So I need to have this function. I need to have a finance function. I need to have a sales function. I need to have X product function. And therefore, I need to have a chief officer of X. I need to have a director of X. And then they start getting into titles, and then they start getting into role responsibilities, and then they start getting into who do we know that's done that before, or what they've done elsewhere. So we tend to work with our clients, and we really wind that back quite a number of steps. And we say, like, let's look at your goals, your organisational goals. What are the key things as an organisation you need to achieve over the next period? If it's your 1 year, you say your 5-year plan. What's, particularly for your investor-backed organisation, what have you committed to your shareholders to do? What are the metrics for success? Take that and then look at what then do we need to do to deliver against these areas, and then what skills are needed to deliver the things we need to do. And then who do we have already in the team? And that can include not just your core team, but it might be your outsourced providers or support, it might be agencies that you use, it might be your advisory board, it might be people that you have already. And what are the gaps? And then how do we think that will work at this stage? And bearing in mind all this has to be linked to where you're funded. And then where are the key areas that we need to prioritise? What are the gaps we need to bring in? What are the skills areas? And then what might that look like as a role design? And then how's that going to hang together? So, that's quite different to just thinking about a traditional, this organisation structured in XXX way, let's map ourselves against it, let's go and hire these people that we've not got yet. Because sometimes organisations at certain stages in their development, you can overhire and you can bring in, functions that actually you're not ready for internally. I'm also a big fan of don't reinvent the wheel when you don't need to, because at certain stages in your growth, often there's things that other organisations have done before that you can, benefit from and bring in and adapt. So it's about being a bit pragmatic about those areas as well.
Yeah, great. So you talked about, having your own team, but also other suppliers and contractors and so on. How can you manage culture both in your own organisation, but also if you're interacting with, maybe suppliers and contractors that might have their own cultures? How do you bring those things together and, drive forward the way that you want to work and the culture you want to create?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to know that culture and to have worked on it in terms of, well, what are our values? What are the things we don't compromise on? What do people need to be able to engage with and do and demonstrate to succeed and to fit in well here? And I personally don't see any difference in terms of articulating that with a contractor or somebody that's on a consultancy basis versus with your own core employees, as long as you actually know what that is and you're able to articulate that well. I'm just going to use it as an example because it's closest to me, but with our own service, most of our clients talk about, their purpose HR consultant as an extension of their management team. We're not there every day, so don't need to be, but we'd have an agreed bank of time that we work with the client per month, and we'll go on to their management meeting, probably get invited to like their lunch, quarterly lunch, or things like this, so they're visible and present there. But they have to be able to, you have to choose your suppliers carefully to make sure that they're comfortable to do that and come in and embed themselves and, be part of your organisational culture. So you've got to be selective, absolutely. But it definitely can work. It's not for everyone, but for the companies that want to do that, definitely can be a cost-effective way. And that's not just me talking about my service. That's about a lot of functions. The number of people that do things like portfolio careers now. Portfolio FDs, so many early stage companies that I work with now, they don't need a full-time finance director. They'll bring in somebody that does a number of days a month and works with a few different companies, and being able to get the benefit of that level of experience at a budget that suits them is really, really valuable. That can apply for a lot of different functions.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. You spoke about values there, and that's something I'm quite passionate about myself. Maybe to give you an example of Muckle, our values are to be kind, to get results, and to leave the world in a better place. So that's kind of like version 12 or something of our values. But I see that being, our future. I can't see why we'd need to change it now, because it took us about 12 iterations of being strategic and creative and delivering, and lots of kind of words that we threw out there, and we kept changing it. We never quite cracked it. And then we really just kind of pulled it back, and we went, hold on a minute, we have to be creative, we have to be strategic. We're a strategic communications agency, we have to be good communicators. But actually, who do you want to sit beside in an office, or who do you want to go to a dinner with, or who do you want to be in a pitch team with, and what are the key values that you look for in your colleagues? Yeah. And that's really where we just feel like it just kind of was like a light bulb moment of, actually, there's definitely some expectations of, what people can deliver in terms of being strategic or creative. But we're thinking about the rounder kind of person, and, to be kind is all the interactions we have internally and externally. To get results is about getting results for our clients, but it's also about getting results for the business and making commercial decisions. And then leaving the world in a better place is, we're a B-Corp, and, we are looking at our environmental credentials, but we're also looking at our impact on the communities we work in, the clients we choose to work with, and so on. So I guess a mini case study there of our kind of journey and values. But could you tell us more about how you work with clients on values and the importance of values? Because some people just see it as either a document that goes in a cupboard, or something that's on all the walls, but people can't really explain it. So what pitfalls are there? How do you go about it? And what would your top tips be when it comes to organisational values?
Sure. If we take Purpose HR firstly, our 3 core values are trust, empathy, and equality. And those are just areas that we're at the heart of everything we do. So trust in terms of how my team operate. My team, we have full flexibility in terms of where people work, and a lot of the time, as long as they're operating with the clients in mind, then we trust them to do a really good job, and that's that. Empathy, that's very key in terms of actually taking our clients and putting ourselves in their shoes and operating as part of their team, but equally being respectful of people as well. When you've got to deal with really tough situations, like take our redundancy, for example, there's a world of difference between treating that in terms of keeping the organisation legal and compliant and out of court, versus thinking of the individual that's affected, and supporting them through that process. So empathy is absolutely core to us, and we test for that in everything we do when we bring people in. And then equality is key, because for us it's not just about helping organisations, and I've not touched on this yet actually, but helping our clients build diverse and inclusive organisations is a huge and actually growing part of what we do as a business as well. So that's just our ones, quickly, just to outline them there. What we tend to do with our clients, so when we work with a new client, we go in and we do a bit of a review of how they're set up, what their plans are. We look at their organisation design, their strategy, everything like that. And then we agree with each client a tailored HR plan and strategy. And oftentimes they might have a values framework, because it might be something that they did early on, it might be something that the founder has come up with, or it might be that they've had access to support to help them design it. Other times they think, we probably know in our mind, but we've never sat down and articulated and worked on this. So where we can, we get buy-in, we spend time early on doing workshop sessions where we'll actually work with the clients and their team members. And a lot of that is based around spending time on a number of core questions. I won't go into the specifics that we do, but we work through a lot of things to really establish, well, how do we do business here? What are the things, going back to what you said about, be kind, for example, what are the things that we just don't compromise on, and that if people didn't do, we wouldn't tolerate? What are the things that inform how we make decisions here in X business? And there's a lot of sort of facilitated questions that we work through with the clients. And we spend a lot of time not just asking the leaders, but actually then testing that and going through the teams, depending on the size of the business, obviously. But a lot of the time it's really important that that's fed upwards as well as just top down, and that the team is behind it. And then the key things that follow on from that is, if then you're designing a handbook, all organisations do need to have a policy around how you manage absences, for example. Let's take that as an example. Okay, but if you want to do that in a way that's not just legally compliant, but also actually thinking of the experience of your employees and about how you be kind, how do you treat people, actually building that into the steps that you take, the comms that you have with people, how you actually maybe treat them with dignity and respect through difficult conversations that you might need to have. If you can build all of that into your processes and your toolkits, that's going to actually be a much more tailored document and process that people will read and feel is aligned to the business that they've joined and the culture that they've joined. Similarly, a lot of our clients will use their values as a practical tool in their recruitment. So they'll test against those. And what I find really exciting is when a business realises it's not just about us checking whether the candidate demonstrates the values that we look for. It's actually being really upfront with the candidate about, this is the values in our organisation. Is that going to be a fit for you? Is that a place that you feel you could thrive, you could grow, and that you'd like to be? So it's very much a two-way tool. Yeah, I could talk about this a lot, but I'm conscious to make more time for Q&A as well.
Really interesting. So we're moving into our last 15 minutes of the session. We don't have any questions yet in the Q&A, but if anybody does have a question, we would love to take those. So please, if you've got any questions, pop them in and we can make sure that we get to those in the next 15 minutes. I guess in the meantime, Lisa, we've heard bits of this already, but it would be great to hear just a bit more about your business journey in building and growing a business from founding to sort of scaling it up, and then ultimately acquisition, and now going into that bigger organization and being the CEO of the brand within a bigger company. So it'd be lovely to hear some of the HR challenges, opportunities, learnings that you've taken from that we could all apply to our businesses.
Sure. No, I'm happy to talk to that. So yeah, as I said, I founded the business originally 8 years ago. Very, very briefly, the background to that is that I actually took redundancy from a previous employer. So I'd been working for a business that had grown very, very rapidly. I'd worked for the founder's previous business to that as well. And it had scaled up. So we'd been less than 10 people, and in under 2 years, we grew to over 80 people. Wow. That was all organic growth. So it was all people that I'd been involved in recruiting, developing, putting everything in place for. As is the nature often of kind of investor-backed and early stage businesses, for funding reasons and loss of a client, that business then had to downsize fairly rapidly. So as HR, you deal with the ups and you deal with the downs, and I project managed a kind of whole transition there to reduce the headcount for a couple of stages. And it became the case that business no longer needed a full-time HR. But at that time it was head of HR, it had an assistant, and that function wasn't needed full-time anymore. They did still need access to kind of ongoing support. So I was in a really lucky position there that actually I started my own business with a first client already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was a really good, it was difficult circumstances, but it was a good opportunity for Purpose HR that we started with a client. And then I was able to build out a portfolio of clients from there. In the very early stages, so I'd say like the first couple of years actually of the business, it was just me. So essentially I was a consultant and I was selling my time and experience and knowledge, and I was working with a variety of different businesses. I did wonder at one point, was I a bit mad, because I'd basically signed up to have, I think I had 6 or 7 different CEOs. I was the HR manager, and they could all phone me whenever they wanted.
Sounds stressful.
What have we done? What have we done? But it was good to have clients, and winning your first few clients, as people know that are starting out business, is so exciting, and you want to do that. I actually fell pregnant with my second daughter around that time, and so sort of 2 years in, I brought in my first, at that time it was an associate, so I brought someone in to work alongside me and to caretake the clients and sort of work and do that. And then what I found was, I suppose to your question about HR, it was so much less lonely having someone else in the business, and I thought, I like this, I'm not going back to being on my own. So when I came back from that leave on a stage basis, I decided I was going to go out and look to see if I could bring enough work for both of us and then to grow it. So that's probably the point when the ambition for the business started to really take off more. Because I guess you could have called it a lifestyle business up to that point, if you want. I don't really like terms like that, but it could be one way of phrasing it. After that, I was fairly successful in terms of winning new clients and growing it to the point that I started to build out my own team. And what I would say, and this is probably a learning, as a first-time founder, every time I recruited someone into the team, I wished I did it earlier. That was my key thing. And probably I didn't invest early enough in terms of just, there was a period early on that I was getting up at 5 a.m. to do all the invoices and all the diary scheduling before starting a full day of consultancy, and closing the laptop at the end of the day, put the kids to bed, and then logging back on and doing it all. And that's it. That's fine, because you've got the energy and you're fired up for a period, but it's not a sustainable way of working. You'll know this as well.
I know this, yeah.
Yeah, I have no doubt. And so actually bringing somebody in that took on operational admin and tasks, and honestly did it a lot better than me as well, put systems in place and things like that. That was just a game changer. I wished I did it really early on. That, taking that forward, I was lucky. I was able to access a few different kind of development programs and things like that, where I was able to get, I guess, support to think about next stages of the business and growth. So that is where I started to bring in more consultants. We got the team so last year, because obviously you wanted to talk about the acquisition, but there was, when it was announced, which was last year, but there was a whole period leading up to that as well. I got the team to about 9 people during the pandemic. And we were experiencing pretty rapid growth in that period. I think because HR issues were actually becoming more and more key for a lot of businesses. It's not what we want to talk about today, but there was furlough, and there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of businesses trying to look after their staff with all these new working practices and all these different things. So the HR had been really busy. So it'd been an opportunity for us, unlike many businesses I know. But for our sector it was. The business had got to that stage, and it was still 100% owned by me. And that was a lot, actually, to have on your shoulders. I had the payroll for all those people.
Yeah, I have it too.
But we were profitable. We were, bringing in the revenue, but I didn't have a board. I didn't have advisors. I'd never ran a business at that scale before. And then I was actually approached via a third party, kind of out of the blue, about the potential acquisition. And it was really flattering to me. It wasn't something I had on my radar for that period. But at the time, I thought, this sounds really good. I'm going to explore it. I'm going to look into it. So AAB is a accountancy and business services firm. And they essentially were interested in HR services as a market offering that they didn't currently have. And rather than necessarily go and build that from scratch, they were interested in potentially acquiring a business. So I won't go through all the acquisition, that's like another talk. But we went through quite a thorough, I learned from it. I've got more empathy with my clients now about things like diligence and raising investment and M&A and all this too. And we went through quite a period of negotiation, discussion, fact finding, all of that. Now that we are part of a group company, I'm still a shareholder in the business, but it's majority owned by AAB. So for me personally, that was great in terms of financial security and everything else. I still run the business as part of the group. What it has allowed me to do, and probably what I could have done quicker, but I didn't necessarily do it, is to reinvest more back into the business and the team. So we've doubled our headcount since then, and we've also massively grown our revenues. But what we didn't have to do was build out the whole infrastructure around the team. So a lot of things that I'd just been doing myself, or my operations manager had kind of just done, we've now got functions that deal with those areas. So that's been brilliant, like support functions, IT, marketing, all those kind of specialist areas. And equally, we have access to a big network of the firm's clients as well. So that's another route that's helped us grow really, really quickly. So we've now got people in, and we've got access to the offices. We don't have to take our own offices or anything like that. We just use AAB offices when we want to. So we've now got people in Aberdeen, people in Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. So it's been really exciting.
Well done. That's so exciting. It sounds really interesting. Yeah, and a great step forward for you. So we've kind of in our last 5 minutes. We don't have any questions yet, but if anyone did have a question, please get it in the next minute or so before you kind of lose the chance. I guess a kind of final question from me is kind of top 3 tips to transform, how you interact with your people and how you get the most from your people in a people business.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll try and build back on things that we have talked about already. But I think it is important to not just think about it in terms of outputs and what we want people to do, but actually just thinking about people's own career progression and what your employees want as well. And if you can then frame employment opportunities in your business around being able to support people to achieve and deliver that, you're going to get a much better two-way engagement relationship there. Equally, thinking about values and thinking about culture, not just reactively, but really intentionally. I think that's absolutely key. And then the last thing I would say is just keep talking to people. Don't assume that you know what people want or what they need. And even when you do have conversations, revisit them regularly. I really liked what you talked about the Officevibe tool and things like that, but have a structured way where you're regularly checking in on feedback, but then equally act on it as well.
Absolutely. Lovely. Well, I've got a big notebook full of things that I need to go and do, certainly around our people. And really enjoyed that. That was fantastic. Really inspiring to hear your story, Lisa, and everything you've achieved. Great I love meeting successful Scottish people that have done great things. So thank you so much for your time. We didn't get any questions, but I think probably because you covered so much in the last hour that there's probably no questions left really. So thank you so much for your time. If people wanted to get in touch with you, you're on LinkedIn.
That's it. Always happy to connect with people there.
Yeah, lovely. You've got a thanks from Sue Higgins that said it was very interesting. So yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully catch up soon.
And thanks for facilitating, Nathalie. It's great.
No problem. Thanks
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.